Thank you everyone for joining us today in another session of Community. Community is set up to provide resources, to provide updates, to provide networking opportunities for our CAM clients, association clients, also for our team, our CAM team, as well as for other people in the industry. And what we try to do is bring information that has value for running your own organization and be able to put you in touch with people that can be resources for future programs and such. So we do a mix of activities. This particular one, an online opportunity with Bill Grusich, and I will let John Augustiniak actually introduce Bill, but also we'll do some in-person programs as well. So keep an eye out for some of those opportunities. Shelby has just put up a list of our social media sites. Please, if you have not had a chance to join some of those sites, please do join. We are also coming up with a new piece, which is our CAM Connect, which is chock full of tips and updates and resources for our clients. And that'll be a piece. The first one went out, I think, last week. And we'll be coming, look out for a future one coming up over in the next couple of months as well. So we're trying to provide that additional resource for information, activities, and connections. So without saying that much more, thank you again for everyone for participating. John, do you want to go ahead and take over for an introduction of Bill?
Sure. Again, welcome everyone to our community session. Today, we have the opportunity to have someone that I've had the pleasure of knowing for 30 plus years, working in the association management industry, and that's Mr. Bill Grusich. Bill comes to us with, he spent quite a few years on the supplier side of dealing with associations, and also through those connections, he served on a number of boards within the association community, from MPI to PCMA, and also has been quite involved with the American Society of Association Executives and the Association Forum there in Chicago. Bill is recently retired from his career with ALHI or ALHI Luxury Global Sales. He also a CMP, a Certified Meeting Professional Fellow status, as well as a Fellow of the American Society of Association Executives in an Emeritus status. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill for a little bit of introduction and a little bit of talk about his point of view and perspective of working with association management companies throughout the years of his career and those advantages to being part of an AMC or working with an AMC. So Bill, I'm going to kind of hand it over to you and we can a little conversation here.
Hey, John, Ed, thank you both so much for the privilege and being part of Community. I've now, appreciate it a little bit more after going on the webpage. And by the way, I meant to say earlier when we were talking about some of you new clients, one of the things you all do on your webpage, I think really is a good touch, is how many years they've been a member of CAM. I think that says an awful lot, and a lot of people don't do that. So congratulations to that. But as John said, I've been in this industry, recently retired. It's been 51 years. And even though I come from the vendor point of view with the emphasis in meetings and events, which I know is a huge revenue stream until the pandemic hit, I've been on enough industry boards and been around enough that, as John mentioned, I've had the privilege of being on the AMC Institute board, the PCMA, president of MPI, a number of different things. So I've seen how the dynamics can work with all volunteer, standalone, and association management companies. So that's kind of the perspective I wanted to share with you. And I know you all feel like you get asked when you go to probably family gatherings, whatever, what in the world is an association management company? And one of the best responses I heard my entire life, a number of years ago, I was at an industry event, ASAE, and I was standing next to Taylor Fernley. And he happened to be, believe it or not, the fifth generation of an AMC that started back around 1860 something. Um, and he gave a pretty flip comment. And this person kind of did a take me back. He said, look, he said, I'm in business, but I manage 20 nonprofits. And the person kind of stepped back a little bit and said, wow, how does that work? And he got into the conversation because you all probably, it's tough enough to explain what an association does. So God forbid you get into the conversations about what an AMC does, but I think you have a very interesting model and we'll touch on it. But I think, you probably look at, I only do this piece and that piece, but when you look at the types of associations, I mean, they typically get broken down into, as many of you know, professional. And in my side, when you hear professional, everybody assumes it's all medical. Well, it could be legal, it could be accounting, it could be financial. I think it's a lot of times more individual membership type driven organizations that offer some certification. There's a lot of trade, which you have a lot in the AMC Institute, and we'll talk about the Institute in a little bit. And these are, I think, more industry type things, manufacturing type groups, things like that, where they talk about the industry. There's a lot of information shared when the CEOs gather about what's going on in the industry. There's technology, and then there's that umbrella of Smurf, which you can break it down any which way you want, but it's social, military, education, although I would say there are a lot of educational groups that probably fall under professional societies, could be both. There's reunions and there's fraternal, and fraternal could always be the obvious ones that we think about, your social and professional fraternities, sororities in school, but it could be groups like Rotary, Lions, big service organizations that we have. A lot of them headquartered here in Chicago. I know Kiwanis is in Indianapolis. There's a lot of others around the country, but those tend to be the big three. But I think, as you the more you dig into this, there's an association for everything. And I mean, I think back to the years of some of the groups I've called on. There was a group called the Association of Old Crows. Well, you hear names like that and you go, what in the hell do these people do? And what you learned is it wasn't what you thought it would be. It was a bunch of sophisticated, specialized radar military type people that gathered. There was the Association of Hot Dip Galvanizers, and you all have the Central Electric Rail fans, which when I saw that on your website, it certainly brings out questions. I'm thinking, is it model railroad, whatever? But I think, you all know it because you live it every day, but you've got an association for every single thing. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and John and I talked about this, we talked about the difference maybe between the AMC community and standalone associations. Believe it or not, the AMC institutes today about 108 management companies. But when you look at the depth of how many associations today are managed by the association management community in the world of associations, believe it or not, it's only 5%. That's it. I mean, it's amazing, the opportunities, the growth side of things. But when you look at Smith Buckland and you look at the Kellans and groups like that are over 100, and you all are 30 groups, which will put you on one of the high ends, because frankly, most of the AMCs I deal with, when you get past the 10 large ones, are probably 20 to 25 to 30. So looking at the number of groups that CAM does, and I know you all are changing, going from a lot of local groups, and that's how you started, to where I know you've got national medical, you've got some Latin American groups. So, it's starting to change a little bit. But there was a great 10-year study that John and I touched on last week in our call. And it was a 10-year project, believe it or not, that Michael LeBou, who I know very well through the Institute, worked on. And he pulled 660 standalones, and along with that, 317 organizations that are managed by the AMC community. And I would say 2/3 of those, and here's where, John, I probably need your help. 2/3 of those were 501c3. The other third in both segments were probably 501(c)(3). Now, correct me if I'm wrong. 3Cs, yeah, it's donations to a specific industry, but it's typically tax deductible. Whereas I think with a 6, it's not always tax deductible.
Right. It depends on the situation. So Most of we kind of have a mix at CAM, if I'm not mistaken. If you can correct me wrong, Ed, as far as C6 to C3.
Yeah, we have probably 3/4 C6 and a quarter C3. And then a lot of the C6s have their own foundation, so it's a C3. And it leads into, not that we have to go into this topic, but an email I had with the stack group this morning about, they have the two different groups and how do they use those, the funds, the advantages of having a C3, but being able to still distinguish between the two organizations. So they usually, always have a different FEIN number. But then a group like Association of Fundraising Professionals Chicago Chapter is a 501c3, as is CAC, Chicago Asthma. So.
Well, I think it's a good thing to clarify, because honestly, when you go to some of these industry meetings, you'll get these people up there, they start going 501(c), and half the crowd knows what they're talking about. The other half look like they're glazed. So I think it's kind of an interesting nuance. I mean, I think most of the ones I seem to deal with seem to be more 501(c)s, but again, it's just kind of an interesting thing. But Shelby, I don't know if you want to put that little slide up about the AMC Institute, but we can talk about that for a second as I kind of get into some of the nuances and the differences and frankly, the advantages of working with AMCs. But if you want to share that. And this is the trade organization of the AMC community, and the great majority of the ones that you would recognize, along with CAM, Smith Buckland, Kellen, EDI, they're all involved in this. And I've been a long time member, and it's very interesting to watch how this group has evolved over the years. Years ago, when I started going to meetings as a vendor, Mr. Smith of Smith Buckland would stand in one corner, Mr. Bostrom would stand, they would never really interact much, because there was this, concern that are they going to steal my clients? Well, I have to tell you, this organization has come a long way in terms of, when you think about what I mentioned earlier, that today the AMC community collectively only handles about 5% of the associations in the universe. There's a huge growth opportunity. And I think the messaging you're seeing constantly from the Institute is, the advantages, the business model, this is what we can do. And I think the real emphasis is not to take clients from each other, but to grow the universe from beyond that. So I think they're doing a great job. But I mentioned that 10-year study. I thought one of the several of the key points, the overall profitability, when you take the survey of the AMC community groups compared to the standalones, the AMCs were 10% net more profitable than standalones. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute, because John and I talked about this the other day in reference to, there's a perception out there, and there has been for a long time, I don't hear it quite as much, that the AMCs are cheaper. It's a very cost-effective, cheap way to go. I want to talk about value proposition, Dave Bauman 101. And this was a gentleman that John worked with at EDI. He was, up until recently, the only 2-year chair of the AMC Institute, but he would always get up and talk about, we're not always the lowest price, it's value proposition. When you talk about periodicals, the AMC community generates 20% more profits than a standalone would. And you think about that for a second, because I know periodicals, and we'll talk about that in a second as well, it's a revenue stream, but it's been impacted by lower advertising, lower, things like that. And a lot of it now is online. But when you think about that, that's pretty amazing. When you think of the leverage, and again, we'll get into that in a second. When you look at AMC costs compared to a fully operational, in normal times, probably 5 days a week, office space, standalone association, it's probably a 50% less cost, probably closer to 45% than a full standalone. Insurance costs are probably twice as much for a standalone than it is for the AMC folks. And then one of the things that I read that really interested me, turnover with AMC, I think it's $500,000 to almost a $2 million budget. Standalones turnover twice as many as an AMC does. And when you get to a larger volume 2.5 million to 5 million. It's almost 3 times that standalones change their CEOs compared to what an AMC does. So I think, again, think in terms of the cost savings, the shared technology, the shared experiences, the shared everything you want to talk about, whether it's membership, meetings and events, publications, if it's a professional society, the certification or the accreditation. But that's a piece of it. And I think overall, I think there's a sublime part of this. I think it lets volunteer leaders really focus on the strategic of what they need to do leading a board. And I think really seeing what the industry does rather than worrying about day-to-day tactical, operational type things. And I think that's huge. It's kind of interesting when you see a group transition for the first time into an AMC, there's always that concern, well, good Lord, are they going to take me over and whatever? And as we all know, you can't communicate enough and it's all about that. But usually you talk to that group 3-6 months into it, it's like, my God, where has this been? And we can't wait. And you guys are going, well, we just got started. I think when you talk though, in terms of revenue streams, and I was thinking back to when after John and I spoke, I was on a Zoom call when the pandemic first hit with a number of CEOs with the association forum. I was the only vendor. And what was interesting was a lot of them, frankly, did not know how to capture revenue that was going to be lost with moving face-to-face meetings, either canceling. Most people move forward as soon as they could. And I think, one thing that an AMC does is you have a lot more experiences in terms of non-typical revenue streams. And I think that's important. And no matter what piece of the AMC world you work in, but traditionally membership has always been a huge revenue stream. Well, one of the years I sat on the PCMA board, we talked about, well, people just don't join right away. And this was back in mid 2015, 16, 17. They actually went to a hybrid type membership. You pay as you go or whatever. Because I mean, in the old days, we were given a stack of business cards and joined something. We didn't know what it was. Hey, go to the opening reception. Today, it's a little bit different. People kick the tires. They want to experience it. So membership is certainly a huge revenue stream, but it's certainly a little different than it was maybe for, some of us that started out earlier in this. There's still, different ways to do it. Meetings and events. I mean, I was amazed on this call how many of these standalone executives, over 50% of their revenue, came from meetings and events. They didn't quite know how to do that. And then a lot of them went to, the Zooms and the, those type meetings. And sadly, they didn't price it right. There was this, well, we can't bring everybody together. So there was kind of a giveaway. And I think what happens is that, the hardest thing is when you price something out there, when you go back the second time, it's a little bit tougher conversation if you have to either charge or increase the fees. And let's face it, a lot of these hybrid meetings, are not inexpensive. I mean, we can talk about, the cost of that because that is certainly one. Publications, I mean, so much of it has gone online, and yet one of the challenges I think you continue to have, your members are all age ranges. I mean, they go from their 70s to their 20s, and how they want to read, how they want to be approached, how they want to be communicated to are totally different. But the bi-monthly magazine or whatever, you don't see it quite as much, and that was sort of a huge revenue stream. If you're a professional society, there's certification, there's accreditation. And this will go off the script a little bit, but when AMC started their accreditation, it was interesting because there was always this rivalry with ASAE, and it's really interesting to see how this dynamic has just gotten so much better over the years, the last 10 years. The AMC community felt, okay, you want to come to this, you have to be a company owner, you have to manage 2 groups. ASE felt like anybody that was even thinking of starting an AMC could be a member and go to their AMC council events. So trying to get these 2 groups to come up with an accreditation. And I actually sat years ago with the Institute on the one that they did with ANSI, and that's really the industry standard. So the great majority of all the firms that are the 180 members that you'll see the graph in a second, you might pull that up, Shelby, just so everybody can see it. 180 AMCs. The great majority of them are already accredited. A lot of them have already been reaccredited, or they're working through the process. And I think what's interesting when you take a look at just the AMC community, and again, this is 5% when you look at the whole total association community. 2,700 associations, give or take, are managed by these collective group of AMCs. 2/3 of them, it's full management. A third is project or whatever. And one of the interesting business models that's happened a lot in the last decade is having a standalone CEO bring the group into the AMC offices, and he or she continues to run that group, but they've got all the support from the AMC. It was a model that was kind of controversial in the very beginning because it, again, it gets back to communication and comfort level and control and everything else, but it seems like it's worked really well. And you're starting to see that a little bit. So that's probably factored a great deal into the 900. But again, 1,800 associations, give or take, are fully managed by the AMC world. And you got another 900 in projects. And the one trend I do notice, Smith Buckland started this years ago, and this is how they frankly exploded. Mr. Smith figured out, if I do the publication or I do the membership or whatever, got their foot in the door, and they would eventually take over full management of the client. Traditionally, the old guard in the day would only do total management or nothing. Well, that has certainly evolved and changed over the years, but you see that a lot more. And you can see that, you got a budget of 1.9 billion, which is a huge number, when you look at the collective impact, and 2.8 million members represented. So that's some pretty big numbers when you think about it, and it's pretty impressive. And again, this is collectively 5% of the universe out there. So that's a little bit of the AMC community, and I think maybe the nuances, but I think there's your own value proposition. And I think one of the beauties, and I've watched this over the years, somebody that worked at a standalone goes to work in an AMC, they're overwhelmed. They do not know how to multitask. They're not used to juggling multiple industries, multiple responsibilities, whatever. And yet the reverse is true when you talk to someone who spent some time at an AMC and they go to work at a standalone. It's, my God, I'm bored. I'm leaving at 5 o'clock. Where did they go? But one of the real pluses, I think, if you work in an AMC, you get to work in all the areas of the association. So many of these larger groups, you're stuck. You go to membership, that's what you do. I mean, meetings and events, that's what you do. Education, technology, marketing, advertising, so whatever. And I think here you may not love it, you may not know it, but you had a chance to get exposed to it. And I think at the end of the day, it makes you a better professional. It certainly helps you a little bit more, maybe in the interest level of where you are, but I think you're in a great situation. And as I mentioned Ed and John, ironically, my two kids at one point in their lives worked at AMCs. I mean, they don't do that today, but I think they got great skill sets and they learn how to move things along. Our daughter's a journalist and was a spokesperson of the CDC, and our son's a commander in the Navy. So I think they learned some things working at AMCs. I always tease Russ Snyder. I said, "Great, you drove my son right in the military," but he's done it now for about 18 years. But he really learned some things. And it's, I think the ability to do that is huge for you. I think the other thing we talked about earlier is just, the ability. You're not stuck with just one industry. I always say, hey, cocktail talk. You go to a reception, your neighborhood, your friends, what do you do? And you talk about all the different industries. And my God, you're like a walking encyclopedia of excitement, I mean, these people who work for one group, that's all they know, and that's all they deal with. We talked about the AMC community. There's also, and I don't know if there's conversation about this, but one of the smart things you can do with, Ed's approval and support and all that is some education, some certification type things. I mean, professional societies, you've got your CAE, which, I know, John, I believe you're a CAE, right? Or working on it. CMP and just about everything there. I mean, you've got your certification. There's also the opportunity, and I think you all have a Latin American group or two, and I think, the opportunity to manage international groups and be their back of the house and cover for them. I mean, that's an interesting dynamic, but it's certainly a great business proposition for anybody, especially somebody that has got to travel internationally, that they've got this being handled by a good quality AMC. One of the things John and I talked about, and he said, we were talking a little bit about the old days and picking up the phone and going out and seeing people. And I have to tell you, and I said this to the association headquarters group at their leadership meeting, and somebody said, well, what's been the best thing over 51 years? I said, no matter what piece of this industry you do, the very best thing are the people. Some you're just going to meet, some you have the privilege of working with. But boy, if you do this thing right, you really make some great friends. And I think that's what kind of kept me going through the pandemic and a lot of others. But you'll just make some great friends. And I think you all have the opportunity with a lot of your local groups to get personal and get to know your board members and all that. And look, that's the best thing that you're going to do, no matter what piece of this you enjoy. I think that's the most fun, and it makes a difference. And I get a kick out of sitting with people my age. Sometimes the old guard, these young kids, they just want to email. And I said, they're better technology than we ever were. And I said, you know what? When they get out with people, they're light years ahead. So, take advantage of that, because it really is the very best part of it. I think one of the challenges, though, we talked about is, the revenue streams, because I think the beauty of maybe not being with an association or an AMC until maybe you came through the door is you've had exposure in other ways. And I think, you can share this across whatever group you manage and your peers in there, some things that have worked, because it's beyond membership, it's beyond meetings and events, it's beyond periodicals and publications. And, not everybody does accreditation or certification. So, if there's a new non-dues way of bringing in some income to an association, that's what these boards are looking for, because a lot of them don't know. And I can tell you the standalones, and I even said it on that call, I'll let them all go around and talk about how they didn't know how they were going to, get pie. And I'm going to share some with you. When you look at the association forum, an event my late business partner and I started, Holiday Showcase is about 60% of the revenue. So when you think about if they have a bad day, I mean, that's a tough year for them. And that's kind of the gist of that conversation back in 2020. So I think you've got the ability to be creative, to have that sort of impact. And I think no matter what group you have, no matter who you work with, that's really what they're looking for. I think they kind of know some of the other things. They expect you're going to help them through membership. But again, that's kind of a different model than it was through the years. And meetings and events have come back strong, thank God. But, is that going to continue? I think it is, because I think we've missed that personal touch for 3 years. And right now, the numbers continue to bode very well that people are going to do that. But there's still other mixtures of other type of educational programs, whether it's something like this or, a different level type program. I think, like we said, there's a broader range of membership, the ages that I certainly am old school. I love to look at a publication. It's hard for me to sit there and keep zooming through pages of public, something online, but I'll do it. It takes a little bit longer, but I mean, it's just be patient with people my age, because we're not as good at that stuff. But, I think what members want to know from you, is what do you know? What are you seeing? What's everybody else doing? I mean, at the end of the day, the conversations I've had, and that's typically what I've heard from every association, at least in the meetings and events. How's it going? What's everybody else doing? Why are food prices so high? Data availability is tough. Audio visuals off the charts, the cost of food. And we talk about all that because those are the 4 big things I think that people are talking about. And John, I know you worked at EDI. That was a big conversation I had with them last month. Spent quite a bit of time talking about those 4 things. But whether it's meetings and events or the publications and the challenge of advertising, or what does membership look like if we do a gradual type membership, or they pay as they go type thing, and give them a timeline that either you become a full member or, we cut the cord. But I think there's some things, but those were just, some ideas and some thoughts that I had. But you know, I think I besides just the overall cost, I love the flexibility, the opportunity that you have, that you can work in so many different phases of an association, which you cannot do all the time in a standalone. I mean, you really are pretty much stuck in the area that you start in. Um, Here you get exposed to everything, and look at the number of industries, and I just think it's a great field, and I've always appreciated this because you go to the AMC Institute meeting, it's different from the other meetings I go to. It's business people talking about how do we get better in terms of every facet of whether it's insurance, legal, all the other things. I mean, so many things I go to, it's either standalone association concerns or meetings and events. And, I think your boards come to you, they never come a lot of times in great shape. They come to you because they're challenged. And I think the more creative ways you can come up with, hey, have you thought about this? Here's a new way to look at that. Like I said a minute ago, I think at the end of the day, they want to know, what are you seeing from your other groups? What's worked? What isn't? This is our challenge in the industry. Let's go. And I think that's kind of what they're all looking for. So I know that was a lot in 25 minutes, whatever, but we can go wherever you want in this thing, John. And I know you've got some things that you probably written out, and I know Ed said out in California going, I can't wait to nail this guy about this and that. But I just, whatever it is,
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
no, you go ahead, John.
No, I kind of want to circle back to that whole part of the value proposition, and part of that value proposition of being with an AMC is the ability, as all of us have, our little, we do have our areas of expertise, but there are, when a client comes in and they're looking for a certain thing, you can go to another colleague and say, hey, are you experiencing this? It's that being able to cross-pollinate between different clients and pick up things that you may not necessarily catch, and just the vast knowledge that an AMC brings table for associations, I think is just, again, part of that value proposition. The strongest part of the value proposition, I would think, in CAM's case, is of course our staff, and the knowledge and the things that we are able to bring to the table to clients and help them grow. And especially in these what I like to use the acronym PC, post-COVID times, that it's really an advantage of being part of an AMC and an AMC family. And I also want to touch on that whole personal thing, is that in my experience over the years of I've worked on both sides of the fence. I started in the industry at AMC. I worked for a number of years for a standalone association, and my heart just pulled me back to the AMC model, because personally it was probably a better fit for me, as opposed to being in a standalone organization. But again, I get to do a variety of different things, whereas when you're part of a standalone organization, you kind of get a little bit pigeonholed in that particular area. And also, basically, associations are businesses. So you're helping manage a small business. And I know Linda had put a comment in the chat about that too, is that, that we're all almost like little entrepreneurs and helping organizations grow. So I think that's, another important piece, and the value that being part and the investment for the organization is that, you're able to tap into a wide, there's 40 plus employees with CAM, and there's ways of tapping into those employees and knowledge bases that can help your organization grow.
One of the things that I meant to touch on was really the sense of community. And I noticed this when times get tough, whether it's after 9/11 or whatever, people really, and certainly in the pandemic when everybody was homebound, what does that look like? What does it feel like? And I think a lot of associations are looking at this coming out of it now. People are not in their office every day. How does this look? How does this work? And I think that is one of your biggest challenges with all your groups, is what does your sense of community look like? Because they do want a sense of community. It's interesting. The highest rated programs before pandemic were always the ones that were where you had the opportunity. It's mostly driven by the young people, where they would not have just talking heads, but they'd have the ability to break down in smaller groups and interact and talk about, what's worked, what hasn't, challenges, successes, and however you foster that type of community, whether it's by meetings and events or your gatherings or whatever. I think that's what they're looking for. I really do.
Well, I have a whole list of questions, but I don't want to take.
I knew we would.
Ed, let me ask a quick question,
Yeah,
Bill,
go
because
ahead.
I want to jump on that community part of it. So making sure that there's a community within your organization that you're managing, but also community within like you as an employee, right? With other AMC organizations, right? So I know there's the AMC Institute, but is there anything else that you recommend for, folks on our team to get involved in?
Well, I think at the level that a lot of people are on this call, I think the forum is a great thing because it's local. It's yeah, they do have a component of CEOs, but really it's driven more by mid-level management folks that are trying to get better at what they do. I think that's one thing. And I think you take a hard look at, in our case, meetings and events. I think PCMA is probably the route to go because it's where your senior level association folks, whether they be standalone or AMC, are going. And, I've been involved with them for years. I mean, I'm a past president of MPI, but MPI has become more events driven and not quite as much meetings and all that. And I'm sure you've got the same thing for your HR or your exposition managers, IAE. I mean, whatever it is, I think that's what you got to do is look at it. And I think, look, ASAE does some great things. I've been involved with them, but I think the forum really works because they're here local. They talk about, I think, things that, your folks want to hear about. And, the other thing is you get to meet people from other associations and
Exactly. And
the
that's what,
best,
yep,
best relationships, your best friendships, your best new ideas are going to be borrowed old ones. I've said that
for
for
sure.
years.
Yeah. And I
Well,
want to encourage our team to look at that as well. I've been an MPI member for a long, long time. ILEA member, and it's just good to hear best practices, get to know people in the industry if you need to reach out to anybody. Yeah, so if anybody has a question or wants to explore that, please reach out to either me or Ed or I guess John too. And, let's talk about you getting involved in like our greater local community.
And
well,
I had the opportunity when I was living in Chicago to be part of a forum and served on a number of different committees early on in my career. And even though I was part of AMC, I also found that it was really helpful for me in my growth within the industry to be able to talk with people outside of my company that are either part of standalones or part of other AMCs and kind of how they operate. And again, it's a great professional development tool. They have a wide variety. I think actually, ironically, one of the things that I think Forum still does it, and Bill, you may know a little bit more than, or Drew, I know who's a member. They used to do like an association 101, which is like
they
a
still
half
do.
day. Yeah, that half
Still
day
do.
session where they get people that are experts in kind of the span of the association management business. So, people from membership and marketing, people from experts in events and meeting planning, people that are more on that CEO track, so that you learn a little bit more about the full scope of what associations do, especially if you're new to the industry or you're coming from another industry and trying to see how those, maybe the skills that you're bringing to CAM, they will tell you this, that a lot of times, so a lot of that can be applied. So.
Well, yeah.
I was going to say one of the best pieces of advice I got a lot of years ago when I first moved to Chicago by a mentor of mine. He said, don't just join something, get involved. I mean, go get on a committee. And you know what? You'll learn some things, you meet some people that you might do business with, but become good friends, and you'll learn a little bit more about yourself. It's funny how all that happens, but It's, I mean, I just look at the folks that I've gotten to know through the years and the experiences of the boards and the committees, and it's a great thing, and it just enhances you in what you do, and I think it gives you more understanding with your own members as you ask them to do certain things or challenge them or whatever you do in your given day.
Bill, I want to ask a question. I will at some point want to learn a little bit more about how you got started with ALHI, the Associated Luxury Hotels International, for I think that's the full
Sure.
deal on that. Because I think, you know, the being a supplier in a lot of ways, we're also a supplier, obviously. So I'm very interested in that track. But I want to mention one other thing first, which is we are in a transition, right? We're going from running, you know, we had 7 organizations prior to COVID. I don't know, somewhere in that range, right? And all of a sudden, we've got all these great opportunities, and some of them not as good opportunities. We would tend to say yes to most organizations, and we're becoming a little more selective on that. And that certainly makes a difference because we're obviously operating a business with, you know, people who we all need to get paid every, you know, 2 weeks, and we have the rent and we have the insurance and all of that kind of stuff. So what is your thought in, I know a lot of things that you've seen over your years are larger organizations, associations, right? What about those like mid-level kind of organizations? Is there a trick? I mean, my thought in the back of my mind is that some of those organizations haven't had an experience with a really large association management company or a really high-end one, you know, and maybe they did have an executive director or they had, you know, a friend that was running it or whatever that might be. What is your thought on, and maybe your experiences with some of those smaller organizations and what the sweet spot is? I mean, networking is obviously key to connect with people, but maybe where's the sweet spot that an organization like ours has that's growing, that's willing to take on, you know, that, you know, $5,000 to $20,000 a month contract versus these huge contracts that some of the other AMCs might be taking on?
Well, number one, Ed, I think it's a great thought that you and Linda and everybody are going through right now. Because I mean, you've kind of started doing local groups. And look, I've watched this, you know, this transition over the years with other firms where you start at that level, then you get more state, then you get more national, and then all of a sudden, you know, I think you're at a great point. And I think the other thing that I've noticed over the years, and I'm sure you all have too, a lot of your leaders with these groups are going through the chairs of national, international groups, and they're the ones that speak up at these different meetings going, hey, I know this company that can do that. And, you know, I think you got to kick the tires in a lot of different ways, but I think sometimes everybody spends so much time going after AMC opportunity leads, and your best qualified growth opportunities are right there under your thumb with groups that you manage and manage very, very well. And he or she is going through the boards and the national chairs. And I'd be curious if you casually ever ask your board members what other groups they're involved with and are they going through the, and boy, it makes an interesting thing. But um, I think you have every right to take a hard look at future opportunities going, this is our sweet spot. You know, we're beyond this. And, you know, I love hearing that because I know that's where you and Linda wanted to be. And, you know, to have 30 groups, like I said in the very beginning, you guys are on the larger scale of a lot of the AMC members. Most of them are 10 to 20, you know, I mean, 30 to 40 would put you in probably the, you know, certainly mid to upper level. And then you've got your, you know, your big ones out there, but 30 groups is a lot. And that's why I love what you guys do with the years and how long they've been a part of your firm. And I, you know, and I don't know how you do this when you get into a bid situation, but I'm sure if potential clients talk to your volunteer leaders, they probably get pretty good feedback. And to me, if I'm on the other side of the fence, that's the feedback I want to hear. You're going to tell me all the great stuff, but I want to know day in and day out, how's Cam doing? What are their strong points? What can they be better at? But you know, I think if you guys can, you know, no matter how you do it, whatever group it is, they're looking for the new revenue streams. And I mean, you all know that, you know, what has worked with other groups that you can incorporate because a lot of these traditional models are different in the sense of community. They want to, they do want to have a sense of community, but again, it's a little bit different because people aren't all in their offices 5 days a week. You got a little bit of that, you know, you know, and I guess that was the question I was going to ask you because you've got people that are in more than a lot, but you know, how do you get the cross section of new ideas and best practices shared, you know, when you're not seeing each other each and every day, because when you're talking to your clients again, to me, that's
Yeah.
what they're looking for. What are you guys doing? What are you seeing? What works? What can we incorporate?
So what's interesting about that is we have over the last 6 months or year, we've created the association managers team that get together once a month or once every couple of weeks and have
Okay.
conversations. And then we have the association coordinators who do the same thing. And we have these divisions within CAM where they can share best practices, share challenges, new opportunities, all that kind of good stuff. So we've gotten a lot better with that than we were because we had such a quick growth, and all of a sudden we have all these people, and we're all busy trying to take care of the clients, right? Especially that first year of managing an association, because you're always learning stuff. And so
Sure.
we're trying to get better because that's the way to, in my mind, for profitability for our own businesses, that we become more efficient and effective, and obviously we're delivering for the client. One of the catches, of course, is that as you do better and better work for clients, they kind of expect you to do more and more stuff, right? Which is based on the scope of work, and there's some,
Sure. Sure.
flexibility on that, but that's a piece. And then another piece that I think is somewhat challenging, I've got 3 calls in the next month or so with some of our bigger clients about rate increases, right? Because, we came in at a certain cost, and once we really went through the process, we realized it's not a sustainable cost, right? And so the 3 that I'm thinking about all have the funds in their accounts to be able to manage this. And so we'll see where those conversations go. But I do believe in all 3 cases, we've done some really good work. And so it's now a matter of, you know, yes, you're paying $7,500. Maybe that seemed a lot when you had an association management company that wasn't doing a lot of work, but it's really a $10,000, $1,250
Yeah.
a month account. And for us to be able to do that work, and I don't mean now, I'm going to stop rambling here in a second because I want others to talk, but it's that value that the association sees in the work that you do, because you are behind the scenes, you're doing stuff that um, does take time, whether it be planning a meeting, doing the finances, doing the marketing pieces, whatever that element is. But because we've gotten so professional at that level, they look at it as not being complicated. Like, oh, that's easy. You should just be able to do that. You should have those financials done a week after the event, or you should have that marketing piece in place. And the reality is there's a ton of work that goes into that stuff. And so I'm sure this is a conversation if you're an AMC Institute type thing where, you guys, we're doing the best work. We're not perfect, of course, but we're doing really solid quality work, but it takes X amount of time. And for this to continue, there has to be an investment that's strong enough. And the leads need to understand, or the volunteers in their organization need to understand that the work is there's a lot of work behind the scenes that needs to get done. So I'll stop rambling, but that's always in my mind, is how do we go and show that not only are we competent and we're doing this stuff, but we're going above and beyond. And the reason this meeting, we just did a big meeting last week for a client, the reason this meeting went off without a hitch is because we put all this time into it in advance. And, I'm sure we went over the amount for that month or that quarter, but, we're doing that work, and you're at a level of an organization where you want to have that high quality, and so, yeah, you could chintz and not give us that increase that we really need to have, or just realize that work is in that place. So anyways, that's just what's on my mind right now.
Well, I think you touched on something really an interesting conversation, Ed, and I learned this years ago because when I had my own company with my late business partner, he told me when we first got going, and this was back in the mid-80s, he said, the easiest conversation is to talk about a fee from a hotel the very first time. He said, when you go back a year later and you start talking about additional fees, he said, it's sometimes the hardest conversation you're going to have. And I think it's not uncommon. And I think it gets back to the communication. And like you touched on there, the visible, successes. Are we growing? Are we financially solid? Or is there that good feel of everything? And also there's a lot of data that you could get either from the Institute, also the association forum, in terms of the cost compared to what it would be if they made a change or whatever. Yeah, I mean, those aren't easy conversations to have, but most of the time they go better than you think they do. You asked the question a minute ago, how did all this happen with Ally? Well, we had a smaller representation firm, Hinton and Grusich, for 25 years in the city. And when the downturn in 2008, 9, and 10 hit, I mean, the two things that were hard for us, we lived and died by monthly retainers from each property. Well, they were going through what they went through to some degree during the recent pandemic. And then we only had the Chicago office. So we looked at it and said, well, we can either try and sink or swim or become part of a bigger entity that has the same philosophy that we do. And that's really what happened with Ally, but it was driven more by economic reasons of 2008, 9, and 10, which were in some ways as tough as almost the pandemic was. I mean, thank God it wasn't a health crisis, but as far as the impact on business, it certainly had that. And we kind of went through the same thing where people didn't hold meetings, companies cancel right away, associations, more than they did during the pandemic, continue to hang in there and move forward. But that's kind of what happened with Ally, and that was 14 years ago. So
yeah, but you still built those then when you were taken over by the larger organization, but you were still out there making those connections and building relationships and such, right? The events that you guys hosted that you've invited us to, which has been very nice, have always been done, with an investment, right? An investment in relationships and an investment in time and effort and all that kind of good stuff. So
it's fun. I mean, when you get people out and they connect with each other, it's a beautiful thing. It's what you see at your own, like the recent congratulations on whatever event you just had. It sounds like it went really well, and congratulations. Now you have to outdo yourself next year with the same client, which I'm sure will, but
well, and we used to, with the team building side, we used to do a lot of open house events, and those were always a good way to connect with people. So, but I want others to jump in with questions, so I don't want to usurp the time.
No, whatever is on anybody's mind. I think I saw some things in chat about organizations and things like that. And I really get back to what where you see your interest lies. I mean, is it as marketing? I'm sure American marketing has some great things. I can speak in terms of the industry groups that I know, whether it's Forum, ASC, PCMA, MPI. Linda obviously knows MPI really well too. And they do have a great chapter here, but I've seen the membership change, and no disrespect at all, but when I'm doing meetings for an association, I want to go where the people that I want to learn from, and they seem honestly to be more at PCMA, because whether it's Smith Buckland, American Bar, American Medical, orthopedic surgeons, dental, that's where they go. So if I'm doing that role, and I'm sure the HR would have SHRM or whatever, the exposition managers or whatever level you're doing, I look into that. But boy, don't just go to an event. See if you can get on a committee and kind of learn the culture. And boy, you made some great contacts, and from that you get some great ideas you can bring back and share. And I think one of the things, Ed, that you touched on that I like is you all seem to be able to get people together and on your team a lot more. And I think that's where the great ideas are shared, because the one thing I have heard loud and clear when I go to the AMC owner meetings, and I hear this in terms of new employees since the pandemic, since so many people are working remote, they feel like it's a challenge sometimes that they get to know the other teammates and the culture. They may know their unique responsibility, but how do you get that beyond? Because so much of your success managing an association is a team effort. You may do a lot of this, but you're going to end up doing a piece of this and whatever. But that seems to be a challenge a lot of the owners were having at one point, and still today, I hear.
And Bill, the same thing is with some of our clients too. I'll use an example, and we have a new executive director for CAC. I'm not quite sure when the last time they got together face to face, and it is that I know that there's still COVID out there, but there's that whole point. There's something about the connectivity of sitting in a room with your colleagues or being able to interact on a slightly social level, that's so invaluable to helping you grow as a professional, and also to help those associations grow. I think sometimes, and I think we touched on this when we talked last week, is again, there's so much more that can sometimes be done in meeting with a group for an hour face to face than it can be done on 55 emails back and forth about a particular topic. I think it's just, and also that whole idea of sometimes you just need to pick up the phone and talk to somebody. And I think that that's just so important for us, especially since, you know, we're pretty much 100% remote. So I think that's another important piece. And I think that's also to circle back to the value proposition that you were talking about. I think that's, again, another part of the value proposition and the return on our investment for our associations is that being part of an AMC is you have that connectivity and being able to bounce ideas off of people and stuff like that. So I think that's, again, a very important point.
Oh, the sound of your voice, I think, is huge. I mean, the impression and the intent comes out loud and clear. And, you know how you feel when you get together with somebody. And I think about what your volunteer leaders go, my God, and I'm not disparaging wherever they were before, but a lot of them don't get out there that much. And, you know, you make it personal and I go, these guys care, you know, and it just, the conversations are a lot easier. The difficult conversations will be a lot easier because you have spent time with them and there's a relationship. You know, you work harder for people that you're in a relationship with. It's a natural. And look, you all are in sales as much as any of us that claim we're in sales. I mean, they have to love you. They have to love your team. They have to love what you do. I mean, you know, and it is the most fun part and the best part of what we're going to do, you know, no matter if you hotel sales, association management, whatever piece of this stuff that you do.
Yeah. It was because it's interesting because I follow, there's a number of people I still follow in the industry on LinkedIn, and recently someone that I briefly worked with at EDI and then left and actually went to the supplier side and worked with a number of CVBs. I don't know if you know Kelly Pfeiffer, Bill.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and she actually just made the decision to leave Las Vegas, and I had made a comment about, you know, good luck in the next chapter of your career, and she's like, thank you so very much. And Kelly and I actually ended up reconnecting after she left EDI through my connections through the Wisconsin Society of Association Executives, and kind of maintaining that relationship, and that's part of, again, getting kind of a little bit more active and involved with industry organizations too can help you get ideas. So
absolutely,
it's all about, like you, it's all about those connections that you make. And sometimes it's like you're at a social event, you're at an, you know, you go to an educational event for forum, and you may be sitting next to people that work with, you know, either an AMC or in a standalone organization, and you start to strike up a conversation while you're at the education. And sometimes that's another way of building your professional network.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we talked about this at one point, something that, you know, as you all are growing, you might think about at some point as an open house, you know, invite your leaders in, your vendors. And I'll tell you, I've seen this done in the past. I don't see it done as much anymore. But Sherwood, which was acquired by Kellen probably 10 years ago now, they used to have every account executive come in and he or she would give you the vision, the goals of the association. And what happened out there, whether it was the legal people, the financial, the tech, hospitality, you heard the different parts of what, and it's a real refresher. And where I'm going with that is I not only think it enhances your brand, but as we're all talking to people out there and they hear that they've challenged in one area, you go, oh, I know a solution for you, you know, and I think you got a great story to tell. And I mean, here you are, 30 associations in what, a decade, a little over a decade. That's pretty good growth. And if you take a look at the AMC members and the number of groups they got, you guys should feel pretty good. And I know you're transitioning from the local to the state to, you know, keeping your options open depending on the industry, the group, and all that stuff. But it's a nice position to be in.
Now, I want to just mention that one of the ideas I was going to type it, but I'll just say it, that I've had in the back of my mind is to invite our clients to, we have a monthly, or we had quarterly, sometimes monthly team meetings. And I would love to invite our clients to one of those meetings so they get a sense of, because they don't know everyone that's on the team, right? They meet 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7 people, but they don't know the rest of the team. So to have that open house, I mean, in person, of course, is better, but it's always a challenge to get people. I think food probably attracts people pretty good, but, you know, but just a simple, you know, again, I know not every part of, you know, we don't have a lot of dirty laundry, so obviously you don't want to necessarily bring up some of the internal stuff, but you could have a presentation where they get to see what our conversations are. So I think that I've always believed that that's a good thing to do. We just haven't implemented it yet. So
Well, I think what it really does too is they get to see other volunteer leaders and the relationships, the notes back and forth. It enhances your brand. I would probably have, somebody that one of your volunteer leaders kind of take charge or work with you in terms of that. Because when it's peer to peer, it's really powerful. It's almost a subtle sell. They'll get the overview from you, but when they hear, you're curious, you're new, that you want to know what they do, this is what they've done for us, or this is where we were, this is where we are today, and that's what they want to hear.
anyone have some additional questions? So I could go on with plenty of questions here, so I don't want to.
Please do. I mean, anything on anybody's mind. I probably don't know the answer, but there's some people on this that do. So whatever we can talk about.
I do, Ed. Bill, great presentation. Heidi Voorhees says hello and congratulations on your retirement.
Oh my God, give Heidi my best.
I sure will. Quick question for you. You mentioned kind of early on in the presentation that the turnover rate at the standalones is 2 or 3 times higher than in the AMCs. Does that take into account the planned succession of like a president leaving after 1 year, the vice president coming in, secretary moving up to vice president kind of roles? Or is that just a general observation you made?
More of a general. I think it's a general. I don't think that they got that specific, but it'll give you, I mean, I kind of think that might be a little bit high because I know there have been some transitions with some AMC folks that, evolved, but no, I think that's just the average. I don't think they got into, somebody rolling off or retiring or whatever, but.
Thanks.
Well, and I want to clarify that because I think what Bill's talking about is the management part of it, right? The staff part versus the board always is going to turn over, right? That's
Right.
So,
Right.
so it's mostly the management piece, but yeah. But I think it's a very interesting thing because it's certainly something that we use in our communications, which is, I've always felt this way that if you hire an executive director, right? If it's a perfect match, that's great, right? If it's somebody who has the knowledge base, has the resources, is going to stick with the organization for a long time, all of that kind of good stuff. But when you're putting all your, eggs in that particular basket, what happens when that person, switches careers, goes to a different organization, has a family situation where they have to pull away, whatever, you kind of are starting all over again. Whereas with our team approach, we have multiple people on an account. So if someone does leave, it's challenging, of course, but then we can transition someone else and we'll have some of that historic information. And, maybe you lose one person out of a group of 5 that are working on the account in some way, shape, or fashion. So you don't lose all that institutional knowledge. And I think that's an important piece to our quote unquote sales pitch to potential clients.
And I could also anecdotally speak to that too, again, because of having been on both sides. For the most part, the AMCs I have worked with, usually the person that was the lead or the executive director or the account executive, I will be honest, rarely changed within the 10 years and we continue to follow those organizations. As opposed to the 2 standalones that I worked with, I think in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, each of them has gone through at least 3 to 5 executive directors in the last 10 to 15 years. So again, and whereas opposed to the AMC, most of the clients that I work with within AMCs, the execs have been in place and still continue to be in place to this day. So that's, again, we're looking at time span. I think like you said, I think the turnover rate and even within like divisional leaders and some of those standalones, I think that the turnover rate is higher.
Well, I thought what was interesting about that 10-year study was Michael Lebu was a gentleman that got in a lot of hot water with ASAE between us because he was calling the volunteer leaders of associations. And, you get back to the philosophical differences at one point between ASE. ASE thought the AMCs are going to put all the members out on the street. So there was a big concern. They didn't speak for years. I mean, finally, about a decade ago, they got together, and now you see Michelle Mason at the AMC meeting. So it's come a long way. And when people call in, they have a web page now that they connect you with, and sometimes it goes to the Institute, sometimes it doesn't. But one of the things, and I didn't know if you wanted to talk specifically about meetings and events, but the concerns that EDI had, a couple of weeks ago were there, and it's kind of what you hear from everybody. One is the frustration of data availability, and I've said it, and I'll say it again. I think you're going to see 2024 open up a little bit, because what we had for 2 years, honestly, since probably middle of 22 or fall of 22 moving forward, increased demand. Everybody had shifted basically 4 years of meetings into 2 years. We weren't building a lot of new hotels, but we've got a lot of new properties now in the works. So I think you're going to see, especially after first quarter this year, data availability being better than it has been, frankly, for 2 years. Food and beverage prices, I know, have been off the charts. I mean, you feel it, you see it when you go to the grocery. That still is a work in progress. So that's going to be where it is. The audio visual, certainly cost. And I think one of the good things now is the Institute does have a pretty good relationship with Encore. And let's be honest, Encore is 90% of the AV situations in every property out there. So those were the things that, that at least in the meetings and events that they were talking about, that were concerned going into 24. But I really do believe, and I've been saying it for 6 months, that the movement of groups forward with the increased demand, that is really settled in now. I mean, the groups that were going to move forward have already moved forward. You've got demand, but I think you're going to see the availability be better, and I think the prices are going to normalize. I heard yesterday the airline prices are probably the best now they've been since 2019. So things are starting to level off a little. I don't know if you want to fly a 737 MAX on the window yet, but there's some some good signs out there.
Another question, with the relationship we're building with Rochelle with CAC, we've had a couple of other clients like this where there's an executive director and we're providing some of the support behind the scenes. That seems like a model that has some potential if we have the right executive director. We did have a situation with one client where they just didn't give us the opportunity to really do what we needed to do, right? I mean, they had some sort of old world ways of doing stuff. So that was maybe not necessarily the best setup, but it seems like that could be an opportunity out there. And if it is an opportunity, how does an organization like ours, I mean, I know we talk about, obviously networking is huge, right? We talk about the AMC Institute and the opportunities through the AMC Institute, and staying in touch with people, all that other stuff. But are there other ways to maybe look at that model and go out into the marketplace to say, hey, we're there for you guys? If you're in a situation where you can't afford to have 4 people on staff, but you need to have an executive director who knows the industry and the relationships, but just needs that support piece put in.
It seems like, Ed, what has worked and where that has really started is, frankly, between us, probably someone getting close to retirement looking for an exit strategy. And a lot of astute AMCs go, hey, they're going to be there for a year, they're gone, we've got the whole, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the thought process is, hey, we've got the chance to totally manage this group. So I think it starts more often than not with a person getting up, at a certain age that's really looking at an exit strategy. And right or wrong, I don't know. Sometimes the boards are aware, sometimes they aren't, and sometimes it works to where it just all falls in. And I think based on a lot of the points we discussed, the price of the property, the proposition, I mean, I think you've got a very compelling argument, but that seems to be where it works. I think ironically, you look at association headquarters, Mike Dwyer, who's now the number 2, came in with a standalone association, and now he's ended up becoming a partner of the firm and on the board of the AMC Institute. So it's a model that has worked well, and it kind of gets back into, how Smith Buckland over the years, many years ago, said, we'll do this piece of it, that piece of it, and we'll take our chances. And in most cases, and it was more technology driven they just exploded with the technology groups because they would do a piece of it. And these groups go, man, these people are great. They save us time. We can focus on the industry. We can look at the strategic. It's a no-brainer, you know. And, you know, the difference with Smith Buckland is they're one of the few that charge by the hour.
Yeah.
So.
I'm gonna toss another question out there. What about young professionals, right? I mean, I feel like it was brought up by some people who have experience in our industry that we have a unique opportunity to be able to bring in young people. And we've had some success, right, with people. You know, we have a wide range of ages on our group as well. But I just feel like we haven't focused on it maybe enough. Maybe going to the universities, you know, it's a place where we can get, you know, young talent, introduce them, you know, everyone talks about associations dying out and this industry dying out, but I think it's still going to be there in many situations, right? And it may be a great opportunity for students and also, you know, maybe to get more diversity within our group, right? And be able to tap into people and give them a really good starting point. Find a really good person, give them the tools that they need and the opportunity, especially maybe with some of these smaller organizations, you know, and to, you know, with these smaller organizations that don't have big monthly budgets with us, we could bring in a younger person and it doesn't have to be younger, but someone who's new to the industry. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's a great point. And where I wish you might get started is approaching some of these hotel schools around the hospitality programs, because
Right.
they understand hotels and restaurants, but they don't know the related, connected pieces of our industry. And, you know, I mean, look, let's face it, everybody that's an association executive today, you ask he or she, and they backed into it. They were doing publications or they were education, and they ended up, you know, this part of it. And ironically, I'll be with the Roosevelt Hospitality School on Monday night, and I'm going to enlighten them about, yeah, there's this piece of it, but have you thought about this? And I see a lot of people from the hospitality side transition and association management. They love it. So I think, to your point, it's an exposure thing. And I think that should be a piece of what the forum does, what ASAE does, what the Institute does is, hey, let's go out and talk to people. I'm sorry. That's a landline we never use at the house. The only reason we have a landline is so my wife can find her cell phone. That's honest to God the truth. But anyway, I really think that's what it is. And you know, talk to these hospitality schools about having somebody come in and intern for a semester or whatever. You would be amazed. And they go, wow, I never knew about this stuff. And I had the same conversation, John, with EDI when they were struggling. I said, talk to your hospitality schools. They understand hotels and restaurants, but they don't know about the other pieces of this industry. And, you know,
I think that's a good thing for Caitlin to jump in and help out with, connecting with the schools. We can talk about it, but Caitlin?
I mean, yeah, well, yeah, I had a background in education before I came into this role, but I also looked at hospitality when I was looking. So yeah, I do think it attracts a type of person, that area, and, you know, it feeds well into association management. So yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk about that. And you know.
education or education from a hospitality school or
No, well, no. So I taught third grade. So just education in general is my background, but I briefly looked into studying hospitality as well. So,
well,
did he? Yeah.
a lot of great education directors of associations I work with, they came out of teaching, lesson plans, organization.
Yeah.
You know, if you can deal with your PTAs, you can deal with any board out there. I mean, let's face it. So no, it's a great experience to have.
And I can speak to the coming out of the hospitality industry is a very good friend of mine who I met through my days at Smith Buckland. She has a bachelor's degree from Roosevelt in hospitality management, and she is now a senior director and an executive director for a client at Smith Buckland, and has been in that role for 15 years. But again, she kind of that hospitality side, and that was kind of her original focus, was the meeting side. And then she grew to learn more about the association management side, and eventually took on this client at Smith Buckland. So,
Well,
again,
three things are crossing my mind. One is that from Cam's perspective, You get people who are, customer service is the number one thing. I mean, communications is huge, organization is huge. Customer service is like over the top, right? And most people in hospitality, that's kind of what they're learning, that's what they're about, right? The second piece to it from their perspective is in not that we have hard work where we do, right? But it's nothing like I remember Linda in the day working at the Hyatt, right? Not that I knew her at that point, but the stories of all the people who worked in the hotel industry and even the DMC industry, right? And those people work their butts off, and they don't work, it's a lot it's a lot different in our world, right? I mean, we work hard, but we're not working, to midnight and all of the other stuff that's involved with that. And then the third piece to it, to me, from the client's perspective, if we can move this direction, is we can come in at a reasonable cost to provide, most young people, and I know this is over exaggeration or whatever, most young people are pretty talented as far as their technology and all this piece, right? And we've got that infrastructure of how to run an association. So if you combine those type of things, all of a sudden you've got a resource for associations that is got the skill sets, has got the energy, has got the maybe price point that isn't, I mean, let's face it, you bring in someone who's 30 years in associations, 20 years in associations, a different type of cost point than when you're bringing someone in who's, new to the industry. So, I don't know, it just seems like, and we have to be, there was a woman who runs a group with women in the association management industry. And she sent a note once to us and, you guys are the most, what was the word she used? I want to say, you take the most risks, right, of an association management company that she knows, right? We have to take risks, right? I mean, we're trying to create something, right? So, maybe disrupting a little bit and coming in with some of those things that can differentiate us when we're going into these proposal processes with, 20 other AMC companies or whatever it might be, maybe a good angle for us. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, number one, to your point, Ed, I remember a good friend of mine who was on the board at one time of an agricultural group said Smith Buckland came in and did a presentation of them years ago. And of course, they came in with their Yamani suits and the whole thing. And I guess he said, hey, look, it was impressive, but they talked over us, not to us. And I think you kind of look at each group because they're all different incomes, different industries, different interest levels, whatever. And I think, you obviously want to target any kind of an approach or a presentation to, that particular industry makeup of group and all that stuff. I think back to what you were talking about a minute ago, though, and I heard this during the pandemic. One night I had the news on, and they said now hospitality, even in the pandemic, was the number one job segment in the city of Chicago. It had surpassed manufacturing, which when you think about this city, that's huge. And, back to Caitlin, I'll be with the three professors at Roosevelt on Monday night. I'm going to suggest they bring somebody from an AMC over to talk about that particular piece of the industry. They're always looking for people to come in and address. And I just think it's an awareness process. They don't know this industry until they deal with it from one side of the fence and they go, wow, I didn't realize this. And I think there's an opportunity for growth there. And, not everybody's going to go work at a hotel or a restaurant or whatever. So, I'm happy to do that. But I back to your point, Ed, I would just really take a look at the group and make sure because one size doesn't fit all. And I'll never forget, he said that. He said, boy, they came in, they looked like Brooks Brothers, Wall Street, and they blew right through us. He said, we went with somebody more mainstream, our comfort level. And I think that's what it is. Your presentations all have to be unique. And I know there's a lot of canned things and approaches, but the groups are different. The board ages are different. The makeups are different. You gotta, position it in a certain way.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions, thoughts? We got 10 more minutes. If anyone's got any more questions for Bill. And Bill, I mean, just amazing that to have you on this call. I've wanted to do it for several several years since I've known you. Obviously, John and Drew have known you for a lot longer, but Linda and I have always been amazed by your ability to connect with people and remember stuff, which some of us don't have that gift, but it is all about that relationship piece, that caring, that human side of things. And I think that part of the reason CAM has been successful, maybe not the memory part as much, but that relationship building, that, you know, like you say, not every group's a little bit different. So we're dealing with individuals in those groups, and not every leader at an association is the same, right? So you go from one that may be very, focused and detailed, and then someone who might be more big picture and, or want to make a bunch of changes or whatever it is. So it's an interesting dynamic in interacting with people, but it's nice to be able to support and do good stuff for them.
I appreciate the comment about the memory, but I will tell you, my wife one night said in front of a bunch of people, and she got great laughs. She said, and she looked at me, she said, if I have room nights, you'd remember what I asked you to stop and pick up at night. And I looked at her and I said, Lois, if you did, I probably would. They loved it, but it's true. I mean, you can only focus so much, but to your point, I know we've talked about it, and it's the last time I'll say it, it is the best part of what you're going to do. Your personal contacts, your time spent with your members and your teammates, and it's going to keep you going. And I just, and by the way, is Drew on this call? I've been meaning to ask you.
He's there to have an event with the Chicago Building Congress today. And I just looked in my chat here and it said Drew left. So he was on for a few minutes for sure.
It's man,
probably on the car. So
it's too quiet with Drew not on the phone. I was going to say, is he sick today? Or he said, oh, I've heard this guy before. I thought, man, we've been together almost an hour and a half, no Drew, and I'm going, something's wrong. It's not normal.
Do you know RJ Coleman at all? I used to be with.
It sounds familiar, but I can't say off the bat. Is it?
I know he's out at Chicago Building Congress as well. So
okay,
he's an Evanston guy, so that's what I thought.
Yeah, no wonder
a little bit of connection. Maybe
there must be something going on construction-wise. I got a note from Bill McHugh last night, who runs the Chicago Roofing Contractors. Pictures of he with his board at some event. Those are the little things John talks about. LinkedIn, and I got to tell you, the stuff you post on LinkedIn, it's amazing. Who looks at it? It's not Facebook. It's not all. It's really LinkedIn that you can really get some hits business wise, or your members go, "Hey, I love seeing that. That makes me feel good. We're with the right company, whatever."
Exactly. Okay, well, I think that's it. And Shelby, were you going to jump in with final words, or John?
I got to update the picture. I've certainly gotten whiter since then. So at least it's mostly still in, but I better update.
That's the problem when you use your picture from when you were 20 years old on these things. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I looked old then, boy. I feel it now. That's for sure.
I think it looks good, so it's all good.
Yeah, we just want to thank everyone for joining today. Bill, thanks so much for all the information you provided. Bill's contact information is on the slide. So feel free to reach out. And then one more plug, just to follow us on social for Community, and go to the Community page on our website for some upcoming events.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all. It's been fun.